Ladies and gentlemen, I have something from CBS News, a Monster.com survey that says 8 out of 10 people report crying at work. Now, see what kind of conditions I work under?
Oh, shut up, you crybaby. Get on with it. Man up, you miserable.
So this is Bill Whittle now.
You're worthless and weak.
You
do nothing. You are nothing. You sit here all day and play that sick electric twanger.
So, Bill,
I fought in Vietnam. You. Go ahead.
This is actually a thing. CBS News reports the results of a Monster.com survey that says some 8 in 10 people privately report that they have wept at work. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but I want to focus on the 45% of them who said they have cried because of bosses or colleagues, not the, I think it was 19% who had some situation going on at home that was tearing them up and had a hard time with that at work. And Bill, this is not necessarily people, breaking down in front of their bosses or colleagues. More likely slipping off into a private place, going to a restroom, break room, or just kind of burying their head in their hands at their desk in the cubicle. In any case, Bill, it struck me that 8 in 10 is a pretty big number, and 45% is a lot of people to have been brought to the point of tears because of a boss or a colleague. And I just wondered what you think this says about big corporations probably, but also small businesses, but what it says about capitalism. How can businesses have gotten to this point where people who are hired to do a job are actually weeping at the workplace because of how they're being treated?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have some sympathy for this. My only recollection of my days at PJTV were sitting in the conference room weeping silently and copiously. And there was much gnashing and rending of clothing and tearing of beards.
That full-time guy who stood by the side of you while you were shooting Firewall just to dab the tears for you.
And one of those poles that the sound guys use, it had a sponge on it. In between takes, you just kind of, poke me in the eye.
We've just shot all credibility of seeming empathetic here, I think.
Well, look, I really didn't want to step on this mine, but honestly, the whole purpose of this show is to try to just sometimes say things that need to be said. I would like to know of the percentage of the people who broke down and cried. I'd like to know what percentage of them are women. And the reason I say
the story I read did not answer that question.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, though. I really do think so. And look, people are going to hear that and they're going to just say, "Oh, you misogynist bastard," And it's like, no. I don't think there's any. If you genuinely believe that women are not more sensitive to men, not more aware of relationships, not more aware of constant, dynamics of personality, if you really think that women are no more adept at that than men are, then you don't know many women or men. And I have no doubt also contributing to this is the fact that the men in this world of ours are getting more sensitive. I almost said weaker, but I didn't. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. I guess it all kind of depends on what you're crying about. I know there was just a really horrible episode of South Park where they had this, we'll just call it a mechanical aid, and this thing had a robotic voice and would say to the women, "Tell me about that woman at work you don't like." And I don't know, Scotty. I mean, I'm just telling you what I see as a human being. But I have seen women get more upset about the workplace than men as a general rule. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I am becoming more and more subscribed to the idea, and I think this makes perfect logical sense, by the way. And for those of you who are ready to have me hanged, just hang on a second. I've come to believe that biologically, the humans that were capable of worry are the ones that survived. In other words, those that peacefully slept in the cave, not at all concerned that a leopard might be outside, they're not with us anymore, and neither are their descendants. And that the capacity for worry, for trying to see into the future. It's basically what worry is. Worry is essentially trying to read the future. You start trying to figure out what's going to happen to prepare yourself for it. And in some cases, in fact, in a lot of cases, it's actually a pretty healthy thing. But a number of psychologists have been talking about this lately. And basically what the argument is that we're built to worry. And when we're not worried about children who appear to be dying of influenza, we still have that worry mechanism in us. And so we worry about smaller things. And this is certainly not restricted to women under any circumstances. And so that kind of, it's not really the fight or flee reaction, but that kind of emotional turmoil, I think, is built into human beings.
President George Washington carried a worry stone in his pocket, essentially, and worked it.
He carried a worry compass. And when I say compass, we would probably call that a divider today. It was the kind of thing that you would use to measure the scale on the map, and then you've seen people walking along the map to determine how far away it is. He carried one. It was made of solid steel. Glenn Beck put it into my hands and said, hold it the way you would hold it. And in the steel, this is not iron, this is steel. In the steel, you can feel the depression of where George Washington's thumb was when he was finding some way to relieve the stress of trying to save this country and launch this nation. So there are any number of ways to deal with stress. I do think that as life becomes less and less tragic, I'm not saying stressful, it's more stressful, but less tragic. We have fewer big things to cry about. I don't think anybody can really argue that that's not true. I mean, just the infant mortality issue alone, where you would have 9 kids, 10 kids, and if 7 of them, 8 of them made it to adulthood, that was astonishing. You're lucky if you got 5. I think all the mechanisms for that kind of emotional response are built into the human animal and aren't simply deactivated when the level of stress gets lower. And since we're built to worry, we worry about smaller and smaller things. And what's interesting about this, by the way, from a biological point of view, is that there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, and it is it has been shown medically that it's more developed in conservatives than it is in liberals. The liberals will say that the amygdala is the fear center, and conservatives live in fear. That's not accurate. Color me shocked. What the amygdala does is it is the part of the brain that's responsible for combining an experience with a reaction. And a great example of this is if you're walking down the path, you're a hunter-gatherer, let's say, and you're walking back home, and you hear the snap of twigs in the background, and the next thing you know, there's a leopard on your back. If you survive this encounter, the next time you hear a snap of twigs in the background, you won't have to go, what was it about that something about the snap of... It conditions humans for an appropriate level of response. So the reason I bring this up is, just to give you another example to make it clearer, there's a case of a guy who fell through some thin ice when he was a kid, and he lived in a cold climate. He would say that any time he walked on ice on the street, like on the sidewalk, and he could hear it crack, he had this immediate panic reaction, which was his amygdala telling him, you're about to go into the water. So what I'm saying is this: as our life becomes more and more easy, less and less dangerous, that amygdala response becomes more of a hair trigger. And that's why you can see a kid who chews a Pop-Tart into the general shape of a pistol, and the school is evacuated and placed on lockdown and SWAT is called. Those people's amygdalas are a little bit too sensitive. SEAL team members are not triggered by the sight of a kid who's chewed a Pop-Tart into a pistol. And the reason they're not terrified and panicked by this is because they have been trained, and not trained, their experience has been that there are bigger things to worry about than a kid's chewed up Pop-Tart. They get shot at with real guns. So I think an explanation for all of this is that we have built into us mechanisms for coping with distressful situations, and that the threshold for triggering those mechanisms has gone down and down and down and down and down, which fundamentally, when you think about it, it's actually a good thing.
Well, Bill, given the fact that some thousands of people are going to view this video, odds are that some of those people are actually the ones who are causing the crying at work. They're the bosses, they're the colleagues who are doing things, whether that's some form of bullying or insulting or gossiping or just in general terrifying their colleagues or traumatizing their colleagues. I guess I'll ask you two questions. One is, if you're watching this if somebody's watching this right now, how do they know if they're that guy or gal? And number two, how can they break from their normal habits, or should they even?
I don't know if it was a friend of mine who told me this or whether a friend of mine told me this story, but it's classic. This father was basically giving some advice to his son. The son was complaining about this person being, we'll just say a jerk, okay? And this other person was a jerk. And the father, looks at the son closely and says, "Son, if there are more than 5 or 6 total jerks in your life, it's probably you." That's a valuable piece of information. If you find yourself at war with people and that you find yourself that you don't like this guy, you don't like that guy, you don't like everybody, chances are you're the problem. And I didn't mean to be completely flip about this, because certainly I don't think there's many people who haven't had an experience with a boss who basically causes them to just why am I here? I know this is an experience you have several times a day, and it's not just bad management. Although I do want to talk about that for a quick moment. It's not just bad management. It's just don't be a jerk. Okay, there's no reason to be. One person in authority can mess up 100 people's day downstream. And if that person in authority is miserable enough, they can mess up 100 people's day every day.
Does he know he's a jerk?
Most often not. Most of the time, my experience has been that the people, I've had some experience with, I've had experiences with bosses who I thought were strict and stern and I disagreed with, but who I did not think were irrational or psychotic. And I walked out of those meetings going, well, I don't think she made the right decision, but she's the producer, I'm the editor, this is what she wants, this is what we're going to do. But without question, there are toxic bosses, and I don't want to speak, out of school, but it's been quite a while now. I spent the ages of 14 to about 33, on and off with breaks for college and so on, so pretty much 20 years, working for a guy who was just really toxic, and his name was Jack Horkheimer. He was a Star Gazer on PBS. Jack was a great artist and an actual genius, and I don't use that word very often, but he really was. But these qualities, these artistic qualities, made him so emotional and so explosive that he poisoned the atmosphere for everybody that worked with him. And in his case, I didn't think it was possible to divorce the petulance from the genius, although I'm certainly willing to have that discussion. Whether or not real creativity demands this kind of diva behavior, I'm not convinced that's the case. But in any case, I had experience of 20 years of working for a guy who made me, honest to God, bang my head against heavy oak doors. I was 16, but nevertheless.
And it seems like that's the excuse a guy like that would make, to say, look, this is who I am, and the reason why I produce the awesome results I produce is because I've got this personality. You need to suck it up, dry your tears, and live with it.
Right. Well, this is why I said I do want to talk about this from a management point of view. That attitude is wrong. If that individual, and again, I mentioned Jack by name only because I have enormous love and respect for this crazy man who made me crazy. He gave me so many opportunities and did so much for me that I feel like I can speak about this with his name on there because he deserves the credit for that. But the fact is, his entire staff was not so much terrorized by him, although they were. They simply didn't know what was coming, and if he had had the ability to be in more control of his emotions, he would have gotten far better results. Having people scared of you is not a way to run a business. The stick option, the whip option, produces the minimal amount of work from your employees who want to do nothing but get the hell out of there, and now are on the kind of mode where they're basically saying, what is the minimum amount of work I can do and not get fired just to get back at this SOB?
They're not innovating. They're just trying to keep from screwing up.
They're not innovating. They're not putting in extra time. They're not giving them the best ideas. As a matter of fact, if that particular supervisor or boss is toxic enough, not only are they not giving them their best work, they are particularly giving them less than their best work. They're getting revenge in any way they can. It's a little passive aggressive, but what else are you going to do? So this idea that somebody has to be the bastard around here, that may be true if you're commanding, a bomber squadron over Japan in 1945. But in the modern workplace, there's no place for it. It's just bad management, and it's bad business. And companies that have mid-level managers who terrorize their employees need to get rid of those people, and fast.
So let's flip this around then, Bill.
Let me just close this one sentence. The power of good management is when it stops being management and becomes leadership. The kind of person that you want to work for is the kind of person that when things go wrong will accept all of the blame, and when things go well will disperse all of the credit. That is the sign of a genuine, not just a good boss, but that's a sign of a good person and an effective person, because an effective person knows that I need the loyalty of the people below me so that we can get the maximum effort out of this. And they don't need to be in fear of me. They need to know that I'm going to protect them. And as far as my relationship with the higher ups are concerned, I feel like I'm doing a good enough job so that I'm willing to take the heat for mistakes, even if they're not my mistakes. And when you hear that, when you have let's just say for the sake of the argument, you have an insurance company, and some fairly junior member of the office makes some terrible mistake, costs the company a lot of money, and the guy who's the manager of the office says, this is entirely my fault. I gave Jim the assignment. I gave him this. I gave him that. I did not make it clear to him. It's absolutely not his fault. It's my fault. I'm responsible for it. Jim and the rest of that entire floor are gonna walk into hell for that guy, and presumably the people above him will also respect the fact that he's protecting his staff and taking responsibility. And this is how you turn an army of embittered slaves determined to do the least that they possibly can into a productive team that wants to come in on weekends, wants to help out. And if you stand there by the water cooler and say, I'm going to need you to come in on Sunday, okay? They're ready to come in on Sunday because you've come in on Sunday too.
Well, final question here, and we've got to make this short only because you've threatened me in the past that if we run past 20 minutes, I'm fired. So I'm over that. I'm okay with it.
Fired and fined.
It doesn't even make me cry anymore. But of the 45% of people who say at the workplace that bosses or colleagues make them cry, and by the way, some 14% of people report crying at least once a week at work. Let's say you're one of those people. You're watching this video right now, and you're in that kind of a, as you've described it, toxic situation. What do you recommend such a person do to break free from that situation?
I'm really, really glad you asked that question. It's really important, seriously. You need to get out of that place. Because if you're in the kind of emotional state where you go home either having cried or ready to cry, then the flip side of that, in my experience, is when you're going to work in the morning, on the drive to work, you are sharpening your claws. You are getting prepared to defend yourself against this unfair emotional onslaught that's going to come your way, and you're just essentially girding your loins and preparing yourself for this ordeal that you're about to go through. That level of stress is fatal. I mean, it is going to take years off of your life. And the best part about this is you don't have to put up with it. You don't. People say, well, this is my job and I'm stuck with it and I can't go anywhere else and there are no jobs. What I'm about to say is very, very, very important. It is so much easier to get a job when you're already working than it is when you're out of work. It's just night and day, because when you are applying for other work while you're working, you don't have that desperation like I have to have this job. And that doesn't radiate out of you, and you don't have to take bad deals and all the rest of it. But if you're the kind of person who is suffering under that kind of person, you need to get out. I remember speaking to someone, I was speaking to a therapist about this actually, and I was talking about how I was just getting yelled at and screamed at and so on. I said, look, okay, I know that's what I'm getting paid for and stuff. She said, no, you're not getting paid to get yelled and screamed at. It's not part of the job. You're not responsible for it, and you don't have to eat it. It's not something you have to take. It is not rational, normal, or healthy for you to consider this part of your job. Is you don't have to take this abuse. You should either say, if this abuse continues, I'm going to leave, or you should just leave. And this is why I say that this business about looking for other work while you're employed is so important. If your job is really miserable, you need to understand that there are jobs where the same work that you're doing now is not miserable. And if you look around enough and you're patient enough, you'll find places where the work you're doing now is actually enjoyable because of the quality of the people. And the tone of the office is determined by the manager. My dad was a hotel manager. He used to turn failing properties around, and the way he did it was by talking to the staff, finding out what their problems were, and immediately taking their side and remedying them. And I'll give you a super, super quick example just so you know how simple all of this is, between the difference between a good manager and a bad manager. When my dad got to the Carlton Beach Hotel in Bermuda, which I moved to when I was just before I was 4, they had a big problem in the restaurant, and the problem was that they couldn't get the dishes cycled fast enough. People were waiting for meals because the dishes weren't being washed quickly enough, and they had appropriate facilities, and they went in there. The previous managers had gone in there and threatened the dishwashers and all this stuff. And my dad went in there, and what he discovered was, of the entire staff of the hotel, the dishwashers were the only ones that didn't have a uniform. They just didn't have any uniform at all. And so he got them a uniform. He got them something that they could work in comfortably, but it had the name of the hotel on it, and it had the buttons and all the rest of it. And the problem went away because he treated these people like they were part of the team and gave them some pride in what they were doing. And rather than threatening them with being fired, he gave them a reason to want to work harder and better for everybody's mutual pride. And this is what good management is. And of all the things I've been blessed with from my dad, this is certainly one of them, is the ability to see good management of any kind. When I get excellent service on the phone from a bank or from a internet provider or whatever, I always ask to speak to their supervisor, always. I don't think I've ever, more than once or twice in my life, had a problem where I needed to speak to the supervisor because they were so bad. But anytime I get good service and somebody who's enthusiastic, helpful, and nice to deal with, I always end this conversation by, can I speak to your supervisor for a second? And then there's this pause. Certainly, yes. I say, yeah, I need to tell this person that you need a promotion and a raise. And that's what I do. So this person is making your company look good. You need to give them a promotion and a raise. That goes into their file, and those things really help.
Well, the principles, those time-tested principles that we talk about 5 times a week here on BillWhittle.com are not just for the political sphere. They're for daily life. It's just a way of living. And the folks who support this enterprise, the members at BillWhittle.com, understand that. They have their own members blog on this private, secure website at BillWhittle.com that often has content that has nothing to do with politics. A lot of times it's a lot of fun. If you'd like to check it out and find out more about it, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.